So I'm going to discuss the glossaries that you have sent me. This was a task we were supposed to do together in class in preparation for your project, which I'll talk about later. So I'd like to talk about a few issues. So you got your feedback, and I've tried to explain some of the problems, but I'd like to discuss them here so that everybody can get some feedback, some guidance. So the main problem was that here I've got a few examples. So the main problem is, or the main point to make really, is that you should check everything, right? I think that goes without saying. So if you prepare this kind of glossary, you need to make sure that all those translations, definitions, explanations, and the actual terms, that they're correct and precise. So when we talk about car parts, this doesn't seem very difficult, but the problem is that if you make these two columns for British and American English, because that was the idea, then of course the idea is that it should help anybody who is looking at these terms, maybe is looking for translations and wants to know about the differences between the two varieties. So if you have these two columns, obviously all these terms here should be in this case, I think, American terms, and here British terms. So not just words that well, let me just put it this way. Some of these terms, as the feedback shows, are not exclusively used in any one variety or in either variety. So as an example, hubcap and naveplate, right? So it's true that naveplate is exclusively British, right? So it's in the right column, but the problem is that hubcap is also used in British English. So you cannot say that hubcap is exclusively American and naveplate is British. And what's worse, actually hubcap is a more common word, right? At least that's a word I've commonly heard from British people, but naveplate is a little less common, I would say, even in British English, right? So this would be confusing or misleading, actually. So when you find this kind of distinction, because you've obviously used some sources, right? But you cannot rely on all the sources without question, right? So it's your task to actually make sure that these terms are accurate, right? So let's use this example with hubcap, right? So I assume that, so here's the website that probably many of you have taken your terms from, and we'll talk about it in a moment. But I'm going to use some reference, right? So of course, the best kind of reference to use is or are dictionaries, right? So if you and the ideal situation is to have a British dictionary and an American dictionary, although actually most British dictionaries those famous dictionaries like Cambridge, Oxford, Collins, Macmillan, and so on, they also include the American terms, and they actually indicate whether a term is used in one variety, in just one variety, or mainly in one variety, right? So it's quite easy to check. So if I type in hubcap here, you can see that the only information you've got here is that it's a noun, and you've got the definition, you've even got a picture, and you've got the British and American pronunciation. No information as to which variety this is used in, right? Which would imply that it's probably used in both, right? But of course, if you don't trust one dictionary or just one dictionary, you can try others. So let's search for hubcap, right? Also, hubcap has two separate words, and again, you just have a definition, no indication as to the variety, right? So let's try the other term, which was naveplate, right? Naveplate. Right. Okay, so you can see in British English, right? Clearly, in this case, this is a British term, and actually, if you look at the definition, you can see that probably hubcap is the more common term, because the definition says another name for hubcap, right? Which means that that you should look at hubcap, right, for the definition, and then you've got this other name, which is naveplate, right? So clearly, this simple search tells us enough, right? So if we go back here, what you should do is put hubcap in both columns and add naveplate as an alternative, right here. So then that would be accurate. Another example is battery and accumulator, which actually a few of you have used this distinction. And actually, accumulator. So let's type in accumulator. All right. Also, so in British English, so that's true, right? It's a British term, but the definition here says also called battery, storage battery. So clearly, it is also called battery in British English, because it's not indicated that battery is American, right? Right, so it's a similar situation to the hubcap example, right? So it seems that accumulator, actually I've never really heard this term in this context, to be honest. I've always, because I watch some car channels in English, and I've never really heard anyone, any British person, say accumulator to talk about a car battery. But, well, maybe it's used occasionally. But clearly, as with naveplate, you cannot say that this is the British term, whereas battery is the American term. Yeah, so you've got more examples like these. Actually, this is a strange example, because I don't know where this was taken from, because I couldn't find any such distinction in terms of varieties, right? So basically engine and motor are the same thing. Of course, it depends on the context, on the industry maybe. So for example, we usually say an electric motor, not electric engine in most situations. But if we type in engine here, we've got a definition here. The engine of a car, or rather vehicle, is the part that produces the power which makes the vehicle move, right? So obviously no indication as to the variety, and actually it's even to me that sounds very strange that any source would indicate that one term is British and the other is American, because it's such a common word, right? And let's try dictionary.com, which is actually an American dictionary. So if we type in engine here, because here the assumption is that this is the British term, right? Because we've got nameplate here and accumulator. So right, so you've got some, this is not a learner's dictionary, so these definitions are slightly more technical, or they are not designed for learners of English, right? But basically, well, you've got these definitions which imply that this is, it could be a car engine, for example, right? Converting thermal energy into mechanical energy, right? So the same with motor, right? Motor. A device that changes electricity or fuel into movement makes a machine work, right? So that's pretty obvious. So it's not an American term because it's obviously used. And actually, here we have a comparison. Compare engine. Let's see if there's any difference. Okay, so according to this definition, it would seem that an engine, so just as I said before, when we talk about electricity, we usually say motor, because here for the engine, the definition implies that it has to be something like liquid fuel or steam, right? So not electricity. So that's a distinction, a slight distinction in meaning, but it's not a distinction in variety of English, right? So both varieties, there doesn't seem to be any difference between the two varieties as far as these terms go. So okay, so the same goes for transmission and gearbox. I don't think there is any, I haven't found any clear distinction here. Of course, there might be a difference in meaning, but that's not what we're looking for, right? So the idea is that these should have the same meaning, but be used in different varieties, right? So, so we have the same problem here. This hubcap nameplate example, and here's an interesting example. So again, this is similar to nameplate, but it's even slightly more weird because maybe not weird, but let's say exotic, because hooter is, as this explanation or feedback suggests, it's an old-fashioned word, right? So car horn is used in both varieties, but hooter is just, well, let's put it in here, and you can see that actually the primary meaning of hooter, old-fashioned, informal, is a nose, like saying what a hooter, what a big hooter. But yeah, you've got this second definition, but again, it's old-fashioned, right? It's old-fashioned, and let's put it in here. Okay, so yeah, British old-fashioned. So it is British, but it's old-fashioned, and car horn is used. Car horn. Actually, we don't have a separate. Maybe just horn. Okay, so strangely enough, we don't have this word here. The object in a car or other vehicle that makes a loud warning note when you press it. So it's definitely what we're looking for, and it doesn't indicate that it's American English. Right? We can try Oxford. Right. So yeah, so a device in a vehicle for making a loud sound as a warning or signal. To honk your car horn, or in British English, to sound or toot your horn. But still, it's horn, right? It's the same word. So it's definitely used in British English. So it seems you relied on this blog without checking, which is not a good idea, because unfortunately it contains some errors. For example, Chubbybox, which some of you have copied. Of course, it's not a chubby box, it's a cubby box. Chubby is an adjective to describe someone's appearance, for example. But the problem is not just the spelling, because even if you Google cubby box and look at images, you can see that this is not the same thing as glove compartment or glove box, right? So you have suggested that glove compartment is somehow American. And that's not the case, because we've got it here. And the other word is glove box, which I've heard used quite often. So this is not American. It's used in both varieties. And cubby box is something different, at least judging from the images. And actually it's hard to find in a dictionary. But because the cubby or cubby hole actually is a very small room or space for storing things. And actually from what I've heard, cubbies are all those small spaces, like the ones for keeping or putting cups in, as you can see here in the pictures, right? So basically they are storage areas around the car, whereas a glove box is this special storage area in the dashboard. So it's not quite the same thing. So this is not a real distinction between British and American English. So you have to be really careful and just check things. That's all I can say. Just use a dictionary. So I've got a glossary here inside of the docx document, and another way of storing your terms is by using spreadsheets. So I'm going to do a brief overview of Calc, which is LibreOffice's spreadsheet application. So of course it looks similar to other such applications, such as Microsoft Excel. And if you have some experience with spreadsheets, you can skip this part, but I'm briefly going to do an overview. So a spreadsheet consists of columns and rows, right? And in these columns and rows you've got cells. Spreadsheets are commonly used to hold numerical information and also to process that information. So it's used in many or by many companies, but also scientists and so on. So, but it can also be used to hold text, basically. We can keep glossaries in spreadsheets. What's the advantage? The advantage is that we can have separate sheets for different glossaries, different topics and so on. So you can see that here we're in sheet 1, and we can obviously change the name of this sheet. We can add new sheets. When I double click on this, I can change the name. So let's change that to car parts. Once again. Okay, so you can hold the data in these cells. So we're going to do just that. We're going to copy all these data from here. We need a separate row for the heading, right? And just as LibreOffice Writer, LibreOffice Calc uses styles, so you can use styles here. You have some predefined styles as well. So if I select all styles, for example, you've got a style for the heading, which you can use. You can of course create your own styles as well. You can decide that the first row, it can be the first row or the second row, whichever suits you better, could be the heading, right? So let us just copy this information and paste it here. And you can see that it fits in nicely here. So we've got this heading. Sorry about that. So again, we've got some manual formatting here. The same problem that we had in Writer here, right? So this is the normal style. Actually, we are in a different program because it's a Microsoft Word document, and I'm using a program which is compatible, but it also uses styles just as Microsoft Word and LibreOffice. So the style applied here is normal, which means the standard style, so nothing has been changed. The formatting has been applied manually, so you can use the same trick, the same shortcut as in Writer by pressing Ctrl M to clear this formatting, and then you can apply a style such as heading. Of course, this doesn't look good, but we can easily modify the style, or maybe you can try some other ones. Right, let's stick with heading and just modify it. So we can have smaller font, perhaps, maybe some nice background color. Let's make it dark. Maybe this kind of purple, and we'll have the font, we'll have a white font, right? You can see that here we don't have paragraph styles because there are no paragraphs. We only have cell styles, right? So we have styles for these cells. how they look, what they contain, and so on. So we also have page styles, but that's a different story. So we can define what these are going to look like and how they're going to behave, but we'll deal with that in a moment. So we can see that apart from this row, we've got the default style here. So let's just switch to the applied styles so we can just see the default and the heading. And now I'm going to copy all this data. So let's give it a try. Hopefully nothing goes wrong. So of course the cursor or the selected cell has to be the first cell on the left, the topmost cell on the left. So Control V, didn't quite work out. And make sure that nothing else is selected. Okay, so it looks awful, but the reason is, of course, that the text, there is a lot more text than the cells can hold, right? So that's the reason. So of course we can adjust the width of the cells by dragging these borders to something that looks decent. So let's just focus on the heading. We want the heading to look, you know, readable. Maybe this last column will be wider because it contains more text. Okay, but we don't necessarily need to drag this all the way until we see everything, because maybe we don't want, we might not want to have everything on one line, right? So that's that. So everything is pasted correctly, right? No problem with that. What we need to change is the formatting. What we're going to do is, assuming that this is the default style, which will be the top level style, and we can create some styles that depend on it. The same way we can work in Writer. So because we want all these columns to basically have the same formatting, except some minor details like different background perhaps, right? So so first let's make the columns more or less the same width here, right? These three, and the last one can be longer. And let's first work with this default style, because we want to improve how it looks. So if we go here, one thing you can change is, of course, you can start with Organizer, which basically, well, we can't change the name here because it's one of the built-in styles, but we will use inherit from when we create new styles based on this one. Numbers. So this is about the type of content that each cell has. So if you're working with numbers, which you are in most cases, you would use any of these, right? So you might want %, so you might have a column with numbers expressed as percentages. For example, when calculating the scores of your students. Currency, so you can select different currencies. Date, so you can actually input dates which will update day by day. Time, scientific notation, fraction. But you can also have text, which of course is not a number, but we can, because we're going to work with text, we can select that. of course, we could paste text here, but the cells were formatted to contain numbers anyway, so that may cause some problems in the future. Okay, so what else can we change? I shouldn't have closed that. We can, of course, change the font, so that's up to you what you want to select here. I'm going to leave it as it is. Maybe I'll make it a little bigger. Font effects, so we'll stay with this default color, because if you want to have different colors for different columns, for example for British and American English, we will define that in separate styles for those columns. And here, this is an important section or tab, because we have the alignment, right? So maybe we want to align everything to the left, and maybe we want to wrap the text so that the text doesn't go beyond the border. It wraps to the next line. We can also define what kind of lines we want to have, or borders actually, the background, but we'll do that when we change the styles for the columns. Okay, so you can see that now this has happened, and of course the reason is that these contain a lot more text, so everything has been kind of spread out, which might be what you want to have, right? Another possibility is to just expand this column, right? And then this will look slightly different. But of course, another thing you can do is to change the vertical alignment, right? So vertical, and you can select middle, for example, and you can see that it adjusts everything in the middle. Actually not quite. Actually I selected distributed for some reason. Which is also an interesting option, but let's try middle, right? So now everything is in the middle, vertically and horizontally. Actually, didn't I select the left alignment here? Again, I think that might be because of manual formatting, which remained after copying from the other documents. So Control M, and that has fixed fixed the problem. So yes, so that might be what you want, and probably you would want you wouldn't want this to be too wide, right? But ultimately it's up to you. Okay, so now what we want to do, because we just changed the default style, so that we have something to base our new styles on, right? So that all these columns have some common features, but they're also different. So we're going to create a new style, and if we right click on this and select new, this should be based on, right, or should inherit from the default style here, and we'll call it, we might call it British, for the British terms, the column with the British terms. And for the time being, all we want to change is the background, just to make it different from the other columns. So let's say we select a bluish color for the British terms. Okay. Nothing appears here because we've got the applied styles selected. So I'm going to select, I could select custom styles, because then I will only see what I've created myself, right? So I'm going to click on, actually I'm not going to click on the whole column. So when I click here, the whole column is selected, right? When I click here, the whole row is selected. But if I click here, only individual cells are selected. And I want to select this column without the heading. So I'll just drag and go down here. Of course, another possibility, if you wanted to have the whole column selected and apply a style so that even when you add new terms, they use the same style, you could just select the whole column and then apply the heading again to this row, right? So maybe I'll do that. I'll just do British, and you can see that this has changed this style. The background has changed. But if I click this row and I go back to applied styles and double click heading, it goes back to that style. So it's just for this row. Okay, so the next one, again, it will be based on the default style. So I'll select new, and again, you can see that it inherits from the default style. So I'll call it American. And the background, we can select a color, maybe something reddish. Okay, and we need to apply it. So again, I'm going back to custom styles, double click, right? So it's got this style, and maybe I'll apply the heading style after I'm done with these columns. So the next column is the Polish column. So let's create a new style. Again, applied styles, and let's select, right click on the default, new, and this will be called Polish. And the background will be, well, what are we left with? We could use some kind of yellowish, not a very Polish color, but we've used red already. Right, so okay, and custom styles are Polish, so this is selected, right. And for the comments, let's just leave the default style here. I'm selecting the row for the heading, going back to applied styles, and I'm double clicking for the heading. So this is looking better. So of course now we can play with those styles, and remember, because this is this like a parent style upon which these styles are based, or from which they inherit. If you want to apply some changes to all of them, you can just change this style instead of changing them individually, right? But one thing you'll notice is that this style probably has the wrong language set. So we can modify this particular style and change the font, change the language to Polish. And by the way, this little A here, this means that the language is actually installed. So all the other languages here are not installed if they don't have this symbol. So okay, nothing seems to have changed. Let's try again. Polish. Yeah, it's Polish. So what's wrong here? Honestly, I have no idea. But actually it's working. It just took it some time to update it, I think, because when I click on these, they seem to lose those red, well, not necessarily. Yeah, I just needed to scroll up, so it's kind of a bug, I think, because it should do it immediately. Okay, so of course we can also change. There don't seem to be any spelling problems, but ideally we should have this set to American English, right? And I think this is already set to UK English. So, okay, so what else can we do when you look at this? Maybe some spacing and borders around these items. So, because we want to make changes to all of these, we will work with default style. So I'm modifying this, and I'm going to go to borders here, and I'm going to increase the padding, but maybe first I'll just add the borders. You can see all these different options: borders on the sides, borders on the top and the bottom, or you can just individually select them if you want, right? Double clicking, you can add them or remove them. But I'm going to select this option and do OK. You can see that the borders appear. You can of course change the color as well to something maybe not as dark, something more subtle, some kind of gray maybe. And the padding, if you remember from our web development class when we talked about CSS, the padding is this area around the text, right? So let's make it 1 millimeter perhaps. Right, so you can see that there is some more space around the text here, and it looks kind of neater. So yes, so that's how you work with spreadsheets to create glossaries, right? So I think the important thing is to make this as readable as possible, to apply individual styles to individual columns, and also to use this inheritance, right? This feature that allows styles to inherit features from other styles, because you can either work with individual styles or with the pair. So let me now talk about your project. So the project will consist in creating a glossary. So you will be asked to create a glossary on a selected topic, which you will choose, and to create this glossary in a spreadsheet in LibreOffice Calc, like this, right? So you will name the spreadsheet, you will add the terms, the translations, some comments or explanations, and you will apply all the styles, right? So you will try to make it look attractive and readable. And So the topics will be posted in a forum. So I will create a forum on Camilo, and I will post a list of possible topics or areas, and you will select those topics. So you will just create a post saying which topic or which area you would like to do.